and Scott Stanley will preside from now on.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I hope your morning began better than mine. I spent the night working in my office at Belmont and arose to face breakfast in one of the world's worst restaurants. His restaurant is so bad that immigrants from Karachi, India, go there to save money. I have been there when visiting pygmies have come in to dip their arrows in the food and faced assorted similar difficulties with them. Now that is one way of beginning in severe difficulty. Let me assure you, another way to begin in severe difficulty is to walk to a rostrum having left all of your notes in the Stanborough room in your attaché case. So that I am now facing the always joyous, but in this case extremely extemporaneous duty of introducing the assembled panelists and gurus who have been gathered at the table this morning. To my right, which is a very good place to begin, there is some room to my right, about 2.5 inches, is a new member of our staff in Belmont, a very talented and brilliant young woman, Mrs. Lillian Burma, who is author of Carte Blanche for Chaos, who is our resident libertarian. Next to her is Mr. Bill Hoare. Bill is our sports writer and our answer man. If you write to the Review of the News seeking the wisdom of the ages, we'll provide an answer in at least a paragraph. And he is assigned to that task, for which he prepared by attending Bowdoin College in Maine and then touring the world extensively before coming to work for us. But he has been caught up in the clutch of journalism. We were very glad to have Bill caught up in that clutch, but he parades about now with a press card stuck in the band of his hat, and he has even talked of changing his name from Bill Hoare to Harold Hoare, so that the name will be more alliterative. After that remark, I'm glad to have my notes. I see that in my notes I begin in the other direction. With Mr. David O. Woodbury. Mr. Woodbury is science editor for the Review of the News. He holds degrees from Harvard, Stanford, and MIT. He is author of 20 books interpreting science for the layman, was science editor on Collier's magazine, and has been a frequent contributor to Reader's Digest since 1938. To his right is the Honorable John Rousselot. Congressman Rousselot, formerly publisher of American Opinion and a sometime feature contributor to both magazines, represents California's 24th District in the U.S. House of Representatives. His most recent article in the Review of the News was a courageous offering in which he came out foursquare in favor of prayer. Next week, Congressman Rousselot will defend the thoroughly American apple against malicious charges by the National Council of Churches that it was an apple which led Eve and the serpent to sin. Representative Rousselot has absolute proof that the offending fruit was a rutabaga grown on a commune near Moscow by a team of international bankers led by Bella Abzug, Angela Davis, and the Catonsville Nine. To his right, but barely, is Dr. Medford Evans. For years, people who do not personally know him have been confusing Medford Evans with his fellow Mississippian, Medgar Evers. A chief difference between the two, far too slight to be noticed on a hot July day in Jackson, is that Medgar Evers is dead. Medford Evans, a right-wing PhD from Yale, isn't even sick. A former administrative officer on the A-bomb project, Dr. Evans is living proof that strontium-90 is good for you. While it will not grow hair, it will provoke a nearly unlimited capacity for precise use of hyperbolic polysyllabics. Evans has survived this experience to become associate editor of American Opinion and unquestionably the finest general book review editor in political journalism. To his right is Mr. Robert Lee. Mr. Lee is the distinguished other half of our Washington columnists Benson and Lee. A devout Mormon, Robert Lee has in recent years given up Coca-Cola, tobacco, whiskey, and for all I know, polygamy. To his right, somehow by witchcraft or divine interference, is the Honorable John Schmitz. Congressman Schmitz is a regular contributor to the Review of the News, a former college professor who is now a member of the House Internal Security Committee, and a very active and loyal member of the John Birch Society. Several years ago, he had copies of American Opinion bearing a famous cover of a suffering American POW delivered on Christmas Eve to every member of the House Armed Services Committee as his personal Christmas card. To his right is William E. Dunham. Mr. Dunham writes the Correction Please feature of the Review of the News. He is a graduate of Gordon College here in New England with graduate work at Boston University and is an active Protestant layman in the Boston area. To his right is Dr. Susan L.M. Huck. Sue is a regular in both magazines. She is a graduate of Syracuse University with advanced degrees from the University of Michigan and Clark University. Dr. Huck, who teaches as a college professor in Maryland, has lectured before academic audiences on 4 continents and has acted as advisor on one of the world's leading encyclopedias. Because of her world travels, Susan Huck owns one of the world's finest collections of Gideon Bibles. To Susan's right is Mr. George S. Schuyler. Mr. Schuyler was for many years staff editor of the Pittsburgh Courier. He is author of 3 books, including his great autobiography, Black and Conservative, and has been syndicated to as many as 6 million newspaper readers. George Schuyler has been in Who's Who in America for over 40 years. As H.L. Mencken observed as early as 1945 in his philological masterpiece, The American Language, Mr. Schuyler is the most competent journalist that his race has produced in America, close quotes. With the possible exception of Mencken himself, and at times perhaps of Westbrook Pegler, it is my opinion that Schuyler is the most competent journalist in America of any race. To his right is Mr. Alan Stang. Mr. Stang writes books, 3 of them, and magazine articles, countless numbers. In his spare time, he exports elevator shoes to pygmy tribes in Africa, where he has become familiar with the magic of jungle witch doctors. Prior to his African experience, Stang was bigger than Gary Allen. But upon hearing a witch doctor refer repeatedly to his black arts by use of the term juju, Stang reported the affair to Arnold Forster of the ADL, who found it to be an ancient anti-Semitic remark. The witch doctor, alas, blamed Stang. To his right is Mr. Reed Benson. Reed is a former member of the staff of both the Republican National Committee and the Republican Campaign Committee. He has interviewed many world leaders and heads of state and is a frequent contributor to both American Opinion and the Review of the News. To his right, Mr. Dan Smoot. Mr. Smoot was for more than 15 years editor of the incisive and authoritative newsletter known as the Dan Smoot Report. A former assistant to the late FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, Dan Smoot's reputation for constitutional analysis would qualify him, in my opinion, for the Supreme Court. He is an outstanding American, and we are very proud to have him appearing regularly in the Review of the News. To his right is Frederick Garfield Allen, known to his millions of friends as Gary. The author of the million-seller None Dare Call It Conspiracy is a graduate of Stanford University and president of California's booming Intergalactic Flying Saucer Company. A former ballet dancer, he gave up the dance when it took 2 tutus to cover his tum-tum. When not competing to produce the best lead articles in American Opinion with Mr. Allen and Alan Stang have taken to traveling together incognito to avoid attracting attention. Recently, they toured India. I am not at liberty to divulge Mr. Allen's clever disguise, but Alan Stang traveled as Babu the Elephant Boy.
My turn is coming, you know. That's sad, anyway.
Gary says that's Savu, not Sabu.